Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this webinar and a big welcome to the lovely Rachel Toseland who is here, and I'm super excited to actually listen to this webinar because it sounds super interesting. It's gone 12 o'clock. We don't need chit chat, do we? We don't need to do the awkwardness. Let's just get straight in with the good stuff, and I'll hand straight over to lovely Rachel.
Thank you, Shezzy. I love it. We'll get into the good stuff. So yeah, as Shezzy says, I'm Rachel. I'm an instructor partner with Thrive. I've been helping them now for, I think, nearly a year. So very much involved with the Thrive stuff, particularly the webinars. So this is my second kind of lunch and learn webinar that I've done. So thank you everybody who's given up their time today to be with us. And as you can hopefully see on your screen, today we're going to be looking at neurodiversity and the LGBTQ plus community. This is a really massive topic. So to condense it down into kind of half an hour it is difficult, but I just want to start, introducing what the links are between these two communities, why it's important, and what you can do to really raise awareness for the unique experience of having a neurodifference and being part of the LGBTQ plus community. So before we, really dive into the content, it's always important to note that everybody's coming to today from their own personal experience, their own lived experience. We all have our own background, our own thoughts, our own feelings on this topic. So the chat box is open. I'll be happy to take any questions if anybody does have any. But just bear in mind that everybody is coming to this topic from completely different levels. So it's always important to be understanding and patient as well. So in terms of today then, it's really important that you do what you need to do to feel the most comfortable. So this 30 minutes is for you to spend however you see fit. So get up, stretch your legs, move around. You are the most important person here, not me. So there's no need to ask any questions if you don't have any. As I say, I'm welcome to answer, happy to answer any if you do. But my role is to make sure that you're being looked after over the next half an hour. And of course, you can leave any time. I know life is busy, or if it's an emotional topic. So if it does get too much, absolutely do what you need to do to look after yourself. So who am I? I've obviously said already that I'm an instructor partner with Thrive, but why am I talking about this topic today? So I thought I'd give you a whistle-stop tour of Rachel Toseland, really. So I'm an instructor partner with Thrive, but that's not my day job. I wear another hat, which is that I'm a financial planner. So my Lunch and Learn webinar that I did before with Thrive was actually all about money and ADHD. So a very different topic to the one today, but a really interesting one. And I love delving into that when I was here last time. But what else about me? I'm a massive film buff. I'm actually going to the cinema tomorrow to watch 2 films back to back. So wish me luck. I've got to stay awake in that dark movie theatre. And I'm a big Formula 1 fan as well. So it's tough at the moment because you may or may not know it's the same driver winning every race. So there's not much competition right now, but I'm a massive fan nonetheless. I'm also a cis woman. So some of you may already know what that means. That means that I identify with the gender that I was born into, the gender that I was assigned at birth. So I was born female and identify as female. And I'm married to a trans woman. So what that means is the opposite. She identifies as a woman, but she was actually born with male chromosomes. And she has ADHD. So my personal experience with this topic is I have seen, certainly in my wife's case, how these two identities interact with each other. Everyone's experience is going to be different, and her experience isn't going to be everybody's experience. But that's where I'm coming to today from. And that's why this subject matter means so much to me. So I've already said a little bit about what we're covering, but really it's these 3 main points. So the links between these two communities, the unique experience of having both of these identities, how do they actually interact with each other, both in terms of how it feels within a person's self, but also how they're treated in society as a result. And then what we can do to support and advocate for these individuals as well, you know, based on some of the challenges that they may face. So a really brief recap on neurodiversity for those who were maybe new here. Hopefully lots of you aren't, and you're familiar with this already. But when we use the term neurodiversity, we mean all of us. So I like to compare it to biodiversity, where you have a habitat in nature that's got lots of thriving wildlife and animals, and there's real diversity in terms of the life there. And neurodiversity is the same. So in society, there are lots of different types of brains. People have different outlooks for how they approach the world. And there's that diversity there, which is really rich and a real good thing, because we have this unique mix of different views and different experiences. So neurodiverse is a term that can be used to basically denote somebody who thinks differently to the majority. So some newer language that's come in that I think is even better to describe that is the neurominority. So that is where somebody's brain is outside of what we consider the norm. So maybe they have a neurodifference. And then neuromajority, which previously we might have said neurotypical. Some people may still say neurotypical. The language is changing all the time. But that's what we're talking about when we say neurodiversity. It's how someone's brain is programmed to go through life. And this last point we always talk about at Thrive, which is your brain is different, not broken, if you have a neurodifference. It's not that we have a desired type of brain that everybody should be working towards, and that should be the pinnacle. We all have different ways that we learn. We all have different ways that we can perform our best at work or just in our lives. So it's this idea that everyone is different. Nobody is broken. So I thought it would be also useful to do a bit of a whistle-stop tour of the LGBTQ+ community. It's something that myself as a gay person, I take for granted, this language, this lingo that we have. And people ask me all the time, you know, what do the letters stand for, or how many letters are there? And it is a topic that there's still, I think, a bit of confusion on, you know, maybe a bit of misunderstanding, and of course, still some quite harmful stereotypes. So LGBTQ, what does that stand for? It stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and the Q, it's either queer or questioning. So queer is a term that has been reclaimed by the community. A lot of people have been identifying as queer recently because it's taking the power out of that word that has for so many years been used to hurt us. And so it's being able to take that and take the power out of it, the hurt out of it, and use it really to be empowered. But questioning can also be used for the Q. And I really like questioning, because I think if somebody is unsure, if somebody is still working out who they are and how they identify and who they like, then actually there's no rush to label yourself. Questioning is a nice catch-all term for if somebody is just still figuring out who they are, and that's perfectly valid, perfectly welcome in the community. And ultimately, what all of these letters are trying to do is just give people ways to identify their own sense of self and who they're attracted to. So it's one of those things where when you find a label that you feel really sums up your own experience and what you've gone through and how you feel about yourself, that can be very empowering. And so why the plus at the end? Well, you know, much like neurodiversity, language is changing all of the time. So there are new terms coming out that people can find that maybe better describe their own experience. So as people find those better ways to reflect that experience, new words emerge that people think might be a better fit. And words are really powerful. So, you know, this ability to find that right term. And you may have seen a lot more letters than just these 5 and the plus. But I think the plus is a nice way of summarizing that there are many, many other identities that people might use, and they're all valid. And sometimes people do ask me, why are there so many letters? At the end of the day, the letters are there to help people find more accurate ways of describing who they are and how they feel. So when somebody chooses a label for themselves, it's to feel empowered, it's to feel like they understand themselves better. So what is the relevance here? Why are we looking at the LGBTQ+ community within neurodiversity? Well, there's actually evidence to suggest that neurodiverse people, so somebody with a neurodifference, is actually more likely to be gender diverse or to identify under the LGBTQ+ umbrella. So what do we mean by this term gender diverse? Ultimately, what we mean is identifying outside of the traditional male or female, man or woman. So an example of this is identifying as a combination of both, or perhaps even identifying as neither, feeling like neither word, man or woman, accurately describes how you feel about yourself. And I think it's really important to say that this isn't a modern thing. This idea of being outside of just a man or just a woman is not new, and it's certainly not a fad. So to give you some examples, Native Americans embraced and welcomed gender fluidity, which they actually call two-spirit, this idea that you have both masculine and feminine energy, your spirit, within you. So this is something that is very established and very respected in Native American culture. Somebody who is two-spirit is not treated any differently within their societal structure. But also in India, in New Zealand, Polynesia, Thailand, and we've actually seen that there's a third gender role, so not male or female, a third gender role has been documented in Arabia since about 600 AD. So this is not something that's new or trendy. Sometimes I hear that, unfortunately. It's just part of the human condition. And again, finding new ways for individuals to accurately describe how they feel about themselves and their own experiences is really important and really impactful. So why do we actually see this link between having a neurodifference and potentially being under the LGBTQ+ umbrella, or being more likely to identify as outside of the gender binary? Well, I love this quote, this Dr. Seuss quote, because I think that in a really nice way, it encapsulates this link. Why fit in when you were born to stand out? So the predominant theory as to why there is this increased LGBTQ+ identity with a neurodifference is if you're already questioning those social norms that you've been tried to kind of box yourself into throughout your whole life, you're automatically more willing to embrace a non-conforming identity or a sexuality compared with neurotypical people. So, we live in a very binary society where, being heterosexual and being cis, so going back to the start, identifying as the gender you were born into, that's seen as the default. So actually, neurodiverse people might feel freer to express their gender or sexuality without the worry of being judged or needing to conform. They already aren't conforming. They're already potentially being told they're outside of the quote unquote norm. So they can feel more free to explore other ways where they might feel outside of the default in society. And to give you some stats, between 15 and 20% of the LGBTQ+ community has a neurodifference. So 20% is 1 in 5. So, it's really interesting looking at the prevalence, but something important to make distinct here is that percentage only refers to those who have been formally diagnosed or have disclosed their neurodifference. In reality, we see a large number of people self-identifying as having a neurodifference, which is completely valid, shouldn't mean that that person is treated any differently than somebody who does have a medical diagnosis. But what it tells us is that most likely this 15 to 20% number is probably lower than the reality. So the title of today's webinar is The Double Rainbow. And I heard this term online, and I think it describes it really nicely. It describes the similarities in the experience between having a neurodifference and being LGBTQ+. And there are a lot of parallels. So I've tried to keep just the kind of most prevalent ones in this webinar today. Obviously, we've already spoken about the fact that language is changing in both communities. You know, this idea of finding new words, this idea of the plus at the end, language will evolve in both of these communities. So that's already a parallel that we've seen just in today's webinar. But I think it's interesting that actually you have to come out, you know, at work or to friends and family as neurodivergent. You have to tell somebody potentially when you meet them. You don't have to, but you may feel you want to, or it may be relevant to tell somebody about your neurodifference. And of course, the same is the case for being LGBTQ+. You know, you have to come out about your identity, and you never know how that person across from you is going to react. You don't know what their own lived experience is. You don't know if they're going to be completely accepting, or if they may have their own thoughts and feelings about it and may have some questions or may have some misconceptions. So that's a scary experience for both identities. And unfortunately, you know, you don't have to just come out once. That's something that I try and talk to my heterosexual friends about is, you know, if I'm going to the hairdresser, if I'm going to the dentist, you know, and they ask if I'm married, I will then talk about my wife. And I feel quite comfortable doing that now. But at first it was quite scary, because every time I came out again and again, it's that fear of what you're going to be met with on the other side. So the other similarity is, unfortunately, there are organizations out there dedicated to finding a cure for both neurodifferences and being LGBTQ+. So whether that's conversion therapy, whether that's medication, there's also this idea of both must be caused by something external. So one of the most common things we see, you know, within neurodiversity is that autism is caused by vaccines, or ADHD is caused by too many E numbers, or just being a naughty child at school. And again, you know, being LGBTQ+, there are lots of, you know, maybe religious groups or charities who believe it's something that can be got rid of, can be cured, and is caused by maybe bad parenting or trauma in your childhood. We know that this just isn't true. People are born the way that they are, with all of their identities and everything that makes them the person that they are, the colourful, three-dimensional person. We wouldn't want everybody to be the same, with the same identity, the same brain type, the same outlook on life. That diversity is really important, because we can learn from other people and ultimately make society richer as a result. So we're never wanting to find a cure or some sort of root cause, and ultimately they don't exist. And so what we see with this double rainbow is that if you have a neurodifference and you're LGBTQ+, you can face double the discrimination and double the hurdles to overcome as a result of having both identities. So what are some lived experiences as well, you know, of having both of these identities? Well, unfortunately, for a lot of people, they were treated very negatively as a result, particularly, I think, growing up, as they were trying to come to terms with who they were, trying to work out what their identity was. And school is a very difficult place to feel supported. Not always, and I think things are getting better, but I think historically, that has been a really tough time for people with a neurodifference or who are LGBTQ+. We obviously have the harmful stereotypes in the media as well, whether it's, you know, TV shows that have, you know, these stereotypes, these caricatures of both being gay, for example, or being autistic, that aren't accurate, aren't always the most empathetic, and don't help those people who are trying to talk about their identity and feel understood. There's also the stress and the mental health implications. And we already see within both communities a higher rate of mental health issues and requirement for mental health support. And we'll see it on the next slide, some examples of that playing out in real life. And then there's also this constant myth busting. So kind of goes hand in hand with these stereotypes. There are misconceptions, and people do have preconceived ideas around what having this identity might mean for you and for your life. And it can be really exhausting having to constantly myth bust, some of the things that you hear people say. It can be really hard work. So what are some of the unique challenges that come from having a neurodifference and being LGBTQ+? Now, unfortunately, when somebody with a neurodifference identifies under the LGBTQ+ umbrella, they can have their gender identity questioned. Unfortunately, even medical professionals can assume sometimes that neurodiverse individuals aren't able to understand their own identity or their own sexuality, which of course is not the case at all. It's this idea that your brain works differently, and so you must not be able to comprehend who you are and how you identify. So actually, it can be that you're not believed or not taken seriously. And if you're transgender and you've made the choice to go down the route of medical treatment, that can be a huge barrier. So unfortunately, in some cases, you could be denied access to gender affirming care because of having a neurodifference. So what I mean by gender affirming care could be going on hormone replacement therapy. It could be accessing something like laser hair removal. It could be surgery, whatever it might be. But being denied access to that because of having a neurodiverse brain and being treated as if that means that you can't make those decisions for yourself. And so you can see how that would lead to higher levels of mental health issues as a result. And unfortunately, we can see higher levels of things like suicidal thoughts, suicidal ideation, as a result of not being taken seriously and not being given the support that you need. And sometimes it feels like you're not welcome in either space. Discrimination based on your sexuality within neurodiverse spaces, but then also LGBTQ+ spaces not always factoring in neurodiversity within their community. And this is something I think that we see a lot with Pride events, which of course are quite, sensory, overwhelming spaces, lots going on, a big party, music, lights. And some Pride events are great at factoring in neurodiversity into that and having different spaces, which I'll talk about in a few slides' time. But others are still learning about having different spaces that suit different people so that we can all have the best time that we can and feel like we're able to go along to these events. And it's really important to find your space. We all know the importance of community. I think we've learned that more than ever these last few years, being apart from each other, being locked down at home. It's really valuable to be able to share your lived experiences with other people who not only, sympathize, but empathize, because they'll have their own version of that experience as well. And there's lots of support groups and events out there. So, I mentioned about Pride events sometimes being quite difficult in terms of being welcoming and open to neurodiverse people. I was at Milton Keynes Pride last year, which is where Thrive is based, and they had a brilliant sensory safe tent where people could go if they were feeling overwhelmed, they needed somewhere quiet to just relax and collect themselves and just be away from all of the party. And that works for everybody. You didn't have to have a neuro difference to enter the tent. It was just for anybody who felt they needed a quiet moment to just relax. And I think that's a great example of a small, reasonable adjustment that you can make, given that we know there's such a crossover with these two communities, to make everybody feel safe and able to have a good time. So what can you do? What can you take away from today to offer your support to these people who have both identities and have this crossover? A lot of these seem quite simple, but I think it's always important to remember to listen without judgment. You know, if somebody is willing to discuss their lived experience with you, this means they're putting a lot of trust into you. So listen to them without judgment, and unless they've explicitly asked for your input, don't try and fix any issues they're talking about. Most of the time, it's just a weight off of their shoulders to be able to share. And truly, a burden shared is a burden halved, as they say. And I think it's very true. To have somebody to listen and offer their empathy is really important. From a practical perspective, if you can, it would be great if you could offer to be there by their side, whether that's in doctor's appointments, whether that's going into somewhere like a bank to help them change their name or change their gender identity on their accounts. Education, you know, going and talking to teachers or to the universities, whatever it might be, being by their side for that interaction to help them advocate for themselves and their needs is really valuable, because often in these spaces we see these people can be dismissed, ignored. We've seen already that they could be denied access full stop to some things that they really desperately need. So if you can be there to give them that little nudge, that bit of support, say that you're in their corner, that can do wonders. And educating others, especially when they get things wrong. Now, we've all started on this inclusion journey from different points. Nobody is born with perfect knowledge of all the different identities in the world, what neurodiversity is, what about, you know, the LGBTQ plus community and all of the ins and outs of that. We've all started from somewhere, and we've all learned and grown as we've gone along. If you hear somebody discussing something that you think could be harmful to either community, or maybe using some language that you think might be a bit outdated, discuss it with them, but in an empathetic way, because I think ultimately you don't know what you don't know. And for a lot of people, it might not be that they understand what they're saying and the harm that it can do. So it's important to give people a chance to learn and to grow. And then finally, if somebody is struggling, particularly with their mental health, direct them towards getting help. So if you need more specialist help, then it's really important to go to services who you think will be best to support that. The best place I can recommend is a website called the Hub of Hope. What is so great about the Hub of Hope is you can put in your location and it will have local support and services for a whole range of things, whether it's mental health, whether it's LGBTQ plus support, whether it's, you know, crisis support, substance abuse, whatever it might be. There will be a local service on the Hub of Hope that you can direct this person to if you feel that they could benefit from it. And so just some final thoughts. There is so much joy to be found in acceptance and pride in who you are and your own identity. We've come a long way, but we are always learning, and we do still have a way to go. There are still harmful stereotypes out there. There are still these organizations looking for cures, these barriers to care. There are things that we still need to overcome, but ultimately, if we can embrace what makes us different and encourage those around us to do the same, then I think we're going to get there slowly but surely. Thank you so much for spending your lunch with me today. I've had a really great time talking about this. I'm really passionate about it, and I really hope you've got something from it, regardless of what you knew about this topic before. And if you want to find out more about us at Thrive, you are welcome to reach out. My contact details are at the bottom, and I'm always willing to talk about all things Thrive. So please do reach out if you're interested. And the next Lunch and Learn webinar is going to be in August, and it's hosted by Cheryl Kelly, who's another instructor partner with Thrive. And it's going to be about dyscalculia and the lived experience of having dyscalculia. I'm really excited for that one because it's one of the neurodifferences that isn't spoken about as much, isn't really, well understood by a lot of people. So I'm sure it will make for a really interesting webinar. I hope to see many of you there. And so again, thank you. You are the only one of you. Look after yourself, stay safe, and thank you again for being here with me today.
Oh, thank you, Rachel. That was So good to listen to. And as I was listening to you talk, it made me really think how important allyship actually is, because equally you're an amazing instructor partner for Thrive, but you yourself do not identify as being neurodivergent, yet I always feel like you are speaking as somebody who gets it and wants the best, and you can combine like your own experience along with somebody else's. And listening to you when you were talking about certain things, I was like, oh my gosh, yes, I felt like that.
Mm.
And it's just something, it never really occurred to me. And I think one of the hardest things I found was having to accept within myself, okay, I need to accept that I'm gay. Then I need to accept, oh, I'm neurodivergent. Now I need to accept and get the hang of the fact that I'm non-binary.
Mm.
There's so much to kind of process, and I'd never really thought about it as a double rainbow and having to come out loads. So thank you for that, Rachel. It's just brilliant, and you've got some great comments.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. I can see that Shezzy's put a link in for the Hub of Hope as well. I cannot recommend it enough. It's everything under one roof that you might need.